Welcome to the Bo and Luke Show, a podcast designed to inspire you to be better, know better, and do better. You can connect with Bo and Luke on social media at The Bo and Luke Show, or send us an email at fanfeedback@theboandlukeshow.com. Brought to you by Sound United. Without further ado, let's get after it. Bo and Luke Nation, we are back to you again this week with a great episode with none other than Chris Clews. Chris is a speaker and author of the book series, What 80s Pop Culture Teaches Us About Today's Workplace. Cannot wait to get into that. Chris grew up in Reisterstown, Maryland, and he's the quintessential child of the 80s. So if you weren't born yet, you're going to learn a lot on this show. He now resides in Deerfield Beach, Florida. And I think his claim to fame, Luke, is a closet full of 80s movie t-shirts. And he's wearing one right now. For everybody who cannot see him, it's the
the scene from the original Karate Kid. Yeah.
I was thinking Cobra Kai because I just watched that on Netflix not too long ago, but it's Karate Kid. So Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bo and Luke. Really appreciate the megaphone. I'm super excited to be here and ready to talk some 80s.
Yeah. I'm just going to start us out with the first question is, why the 80s? What got you so intrigued about pop culture from the 80s?
So two things. From a bias perspective, I was born in 1970. So my formative years were 80 to 89. I tell people basically everything I did for the first time, I did in the 80s. And that was my moment, 10 years old to 19 years old. So for me, being waxing nostalgic about my youth is a lot of fun. And I'm very passionate about it. So from a bias perspective, it's that I grew up in the 80s. If I take a step back and think why 80s pop culture, well, we're sitting here in 2020 and there really isn't anything hotter in pop culture than 80s. Still 35, 40 years later, we're still talking about these movies and music, and it doesn't seem to be going away. And I have my theories about that. We can get into that. But I think because 80s pop culture just continues to resonate generation after generation, that's why I thought it was a really interesting time to dissect and really dive deep into.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I think you're right. But before we get into all that, tell us a little bit about what you did prior to getting into all this, because I know you had a career before today. You had a long career in marketing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I spent a little over 20 years in marketing. Started out with Planet Hollywood in Orlando, Florida, back in 94, 95. Wow. I actually took a job doing security there for the celebrities. And then I started bussing tables just to kind of get in front of the marketing director, because it was difficult back then to get a job at Planet Hollywood. It was a super hot property to work at, particularly in Orlando. And got the job in marketing there. And so I went from Planet Hollywood. I worked at Hublot, high-end Swiss watch company for a little while, did some ad agency work, spent about 7 years in financial services marketing, did some tech marketing, software marketing. And that was up until about 2 years ago. My last job was at DHL, on a software division of DHL.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's an awesome background. And I think, I was just thinking about what you said about like how the 80s just really resonate with people. Like now that I'm thinking about it, I guess I've never just sat back and thought about it. But when you look at cinema and as it progresses, like the 80s was the first decade where they could actually do really cool stuff. Not only with scripts, but with cameras. You think about all the movies that came out. I mean, look at like movies like Top Gun, like they weren't doing stuff like that in the 60s and 70s. So I think it does resonate with a lot of people, who connected with movies at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what's really interesting about the 80s is I kind of say that it was really, in my opinion, my humble opinion, it seems to be the last decade where the people were able to choose what the pop culture was going to be. And what I mean by that is they threw a lot of stuff out there to see what would stick. And the really great example is in music, 80s music. How many one-hit wonders came out of 80s music? Mm-hmm. These bands that had one, maybe two songs, and then that was it. And what was really interesting about the pop culture in the 80s is that they didn't have these huge budgets. There were movies and music that had some budgets, but they didn't have these massive budgets like they do today. The investment that was made up front in a musician or a movie wasn't what it is today. It's almost as if kind of gotten to the mid to late 90s where they started making these investment in the pop culture properties before it even hit the market. And so they didn't have a choice but for us to like it. And they basically put it in front of us and said, you're going to like this because we're going to show it to you over and over and over again until you do, because we have to make our money back. Whether it's good or not, we've got to make our money back. And the 80s was the last decade where we were actually had the opportunity to kind of tell them the box for the movies. You had the box office, the $2 movie tickets, if you remember those. You know, a great movie would be in the movie theater for 50 weeks, not 3 weeks or 5 weeks, 50 weeks, because that's where they made their money. They weren't going overseas. They had a video store if they were lucky 12 months later. And then another 6 months after that, maybe they got lucky enough to make some money off of HBO. So the stories had to be great.
Yeah.
The characters had to be great. And I think that was the big difference.
Great point.
Great point. That is so fascinating. That takes you back to different times or different movies that you watched or that I watched in the 80s. And you think about it was the 80s, I believe, when E.T. came out. And we're just literally talking about this over the weekend with the family. Like, hey, that's the movie I watched the most times in the theater. Like because, you know, it wasn't, you just said it took 6 months after it ended in the theater before it hit VHS and video at Blockbuster, right? So if you wanted to watch it over, you had to go back to the theater and have that experience all over again. And I think I went to the theater like 6 times. I think that was my record for any particular movie. The nostalgia of all of that just doesn't even seem in my mind today like that even exists today. Right.
Yeah, it would be tough to replicate, right? I mean, because there's so many, you can get your hands on the movies and the pop culture in so many different ways and very quickly. So there isn't that. I think we talked about Blockbuster, you know, behind me here. This is actually a shot. I visited the last Blockbuster on Earth in Bend, Oregon. It's still there.
Oh,
I was there about a year ago, and I took a shot of it, and of course, use it as my virtual background. So for those of you that can't see it, I'm standing inside of a Blockbuster store. But I kind of miss that, going to the Blockbuster store on a Friday night and sitting by the return bin, waiting for somebody to bring the movie back that you were hoping to get, and not knowing if you're actually going to see what you want to see. There's something to be said for that.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, I love it. Miss that every Friday night. I miss everything about it, even the late fees.
Even the late fees.
That is one of those things, though. You're so on point that that generations today, that I don't even know what to compare that to, because they won't experience that, especially when it comes to movies entertainment. That will just never happen again. You just don't have to wait for it and have that excitement of, man, I gotta get there early enough so I can get the movie. Or like you said, I did it. I can't even count the number of times I sat next to the return bin. Or I just hang out in the store until I saw people coming back in. Hey, what's up? What's we just got put back up there, right?
Oh yeah,
exactly.
I would say that's a constant thing. I'd go up to the counter, you know, and be like, "Hey, do you have whatever movie I'm looking for in the return bin?"
Yeah,
and they'd go and check for me. No, okay, I'd wander around for 30 more minutes and then ask again.
And so, you know, this is the really interesting thing, Bo. Bo, you brought up the idea of waiting around, and if there's anything that's even compares to that. And I talk about pop culture going all the way back to, we'll call it like the late 50s. My mom shared a story with me because she grew up overseas. My grandfather was a foreign service officer, so she grew up in a lot of different countries. And when she was I believe in Germany, Elvis Presley was supposedly stationed there at the time that she was there in Germany. And they were going from West Germany to East Germany to play a softball game. And I think she was about 15. And one of the girls thought she saw Elvis coming out of a barrack and started screaming that it was Elvis. And they screamed at the bus driver to stop the bus, stop the bus, stop the bus. And he stops. And of course, they're all crying. She said, all the girls are crying that this is Elvis. And it wasn't Elvis. It was a guy that looked like him, but it ended up not being Elvis. And when you think about that, back then, the access to images of the people in pop culture, very, very few, maybe in a newspaper, maybe on television every so often, but there was no way, if you missed it, you didn't get to see it again on television.
Right. And
then you moved into the 60s and 70s and you got a little more access, and into the 80s, a little bit more. I remember telling somebody that if I wanted to know about 70s pop culture, if I wanted to know who Led Zeppelin was, I had to go ask the guy that was sitting on the Camaro with the jean jacket and the Led Zeppelin patch. And I wasn't doing that. I wasn't doing it. That was my option to find out about pop culture beforehand. And now you can really get it at your fingertips. And that does make a difference. It's not quite as exciting.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. It's not as exciting. It's just too easy to get information and to learn what you want to learn, that it takes the excitement, or a lot of the excitement right out of it.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean, I think kids would tell you that it's kind of cool that they can have a conversation with a pop culture icon on social media. And that does happen. And that is kind of cool. You can interact like that, because that really didn't exist before. Unless you maybe, there used to be those happy birthday phone calls for $20 or whatever. Right. But, we didn't have that. And I guess that's kind of cool, but still the access is right there. So,
yeah. So give us an example, before I get into your book. Cool example off the top of your head of how you have taken a piece of 80s pop culture and applied it to a lesson inside today's workplace.
Yeah, sure. So I'll use the one that got me. There were two quotes in two different movies from the 80s where I made the decision to leave the corporate world behind and take my leap of faith into becoming an author and a speaker on 80s pop culture and what it can teach us. The first one was The Breakfast Club, and iconic 80s movie. Yeah. And I came home from work one day. I was just kind of in a job I wasn't digging, and I think a lot of people have been in that position. And I was having a self-pity party of one, and I was watching The Breakfast Club, and Bender says screws fall out all the time. The world's an imperfect place. And I kind of sat up and I thought, God, my screws have fallen out. I'm in an imperfect place. What am I going to do? Am I going to pick up those screws and just put them back in exactly the way they were, because they're going to fall out again? Yeah. I'm going to find, some new screws to put in. Am I going to get a whole new door? What am I going to do? And it just kind of hit me that I was in this imperfect place. My screws had fallen out. And that was one quote. And then the second one that really drove me towards this new life was from The Outsiders, when Johnny Cage said, the Pony Boy, you still have a lot of time to make yourself be what you want.
Yeah.
That one I have on a coffee mug that I drink out of every single morning. Yeah. Because that's the one at 47, I'm 50 now, at 47 and a half, I decided to take the leap of faith. That's, not 25, that's not 30, that's 47 and a half. I said, I'm going to go do this. You still have a lot of time to make yourself be what you want.
Yeah, sure. That falls right in line with, my gosh, I think a part of our theme and what we talk about even on the show with previous guests. It's that, before speaking to you and knowing or remembering that quote from the Breakfast Club, that, like, you're just never too old to go after your dreams. And that's what we should be doing.
Totally. And the idea of screws falling out, they are going to fall out in your life and in your business. And it's how you react to them that matters. They're going to fall out. It's inevitable. Right. It's just, what are you going to do when they do? How do you react?
That's right.
And here's the crazy thing is most people are like, oh, well, a lot of people would say, hey, I'm 47 years old. I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be starting something new. But hang on a minute. You've got all of life lessons and education behind you at that point. It's almost crazier to start doing something new when you're young. Like you think, like, who was it that said that quote? Like, youth is wasted on the young.
Yeah.
Right. So we think about it. And when we're going out there trying to start something new, there's probably no better time in your life. Look, you're still in your prime. You have life lessons that you've learned. Most people have probably failed a few times, and it's better. You learn those lessons. Yeah. You can probably do a lot more with your life at that point than you ever could when you're younger. I mean, it's kind of luck when you're young.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And clearly I do, because I'm standing here now, I brought a lot of life lessons to the table. I understood enough about life and business to be able to position myself to say, I'm in a good place now to go ahead and give this a shot. And I understood what it is. I understand what it is to not give up either, to continue to push, continue to pursue. When you're younger, you hit a wall and you kind of think, all right, well, there's a wall. Yeah. But you realize, like, those walls are put up to be knocked down. And so as you get older, you start to realize that.
That's right. Man. It's with everything. I'm in sales, and it blows my mind. I'm 30. So God, I just turned 38. I almost said I was 37, 38. Yeah. Even like 5 years ago, I'm like, geez, how did I sell anything 5 years ago? Like the difference between what I'm doing now and then. And it doesn't seem like it's that long ago, but I was like, man, how was I successful at that point? So it's crazy, Yeah.
Yeah, you do a lot of growing, and you're right. I mean, it's, I'm 50 now, and I feel like I'm in a perfect position to make this a successful property. And I have been making it a successful property. So it's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Good for you, man.
Yeah, no, I love it. Taking the leap. That's what it's all about. Good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's, there's some good lessons about that too, about
I
taking
bet.
the leap of faith. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I know. So just so that I don't forget, you had mentioned that there's a great lesson. Um, I think it's a lesson in leadership from the iconic musician Prince.
Yes.
One of my all-time favorites.
Yeah.
What is that lesson?
Yeah, he was one of my all-time favorites before I found out about this story, and now it just kind of cements him as probably my favorite musician of all time. And I know people talk about Michael Jackson being the king of pop in the 80s, and that's cool. I mean, he can have that moniker. Prince was the king of music. I mean, if you really look back at what he did, Purple Rain, the entire movie, right? I mean, he composed the movie essentially, or composed the music for a movie, but he also wrote a lot of music as well for Sinead O'Connor, Nothing Compares to You, for the Bangles, Manic Monday. I mean, he did a lot of stuff that people don't realize how many songs he actually wrote that he didn't even perform, and then all the instruments he played. Well, in 1987, Suzanne Vega, if you remember her, she was an alt singer. She had a song called Left of Center, and then she had a song called My Name is Luca. And that was her big song. I live on the second floor. I live upstairs from you. And that's all the singing you're going to get from me. It's pretty bad. But anyway, so people kind of remember that song. So Suzanne Vega was this alt singer, and she had, a little bit of play. But Prince in 1987, he was the king. And he heard this song, and he was so moved by the song that he penned a handwritten note to her that said, "Dearest Suzanne, Luca is the most compelling piece of music I've heard in a long time. There are no words to tell you all the things I feel when I hear it. I thank God for you, Prince."
Yeah.
And he got this delivered to her. 1987, there's no internet, there's no digital means to get that. He had to have this handwritten note delivered to her.
Yeah.
It's really awesome. And we know this because in 2016, when he passed away, Suzanne Vega put that note on social media to show everybody the kind of guy he was behind the scenes. And this is where kind of our leadership lesson comes in, that he taught us the difference between those that lead and those that rule. So when you get that stage of success, when a ruler gets that stage of success, they kind of keep everybody below it. They don't want to share it. When a leader gets that stage of success, they share the stage. And they do that by, when they see other people doing something great, they let them know, hey, I see you doing something great. Keep it up, keep going, provide encouragement, right? I mean, this clearly would have given her a boost of self-confidence.
Oh, 100%.
Hey, Prince heard my song and took the time to pen this handwritten note to me. Yeah. And that's a really important lesson for managers and leaders today. Not only the handwritten note being a lost art, but this idea of, encouragement doesn't cost a thing.
Yep.
And that's a really important lesson for all of us to know who are managers and leaders. Encouragement doesn't cost a thing. And this is what he showed us. And that it's okay to share the stage. In fact, you should share the stage. If you're up there and you have success, reach out to people who are doing something great. Let them know and give them a piece of the stage. Share it with them. Great leaders aren't afraid of that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. That's a great analogy for sure.
100%. I love that story too.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Those are the kind of stories that, we got to keep alive. Like, we need to tell those types of stories.
Oh yeah.
Over and over and over, because they never get old. They're real, they're raw. And they tell teach such a great lesson.
Yeah. And you can Google Suzanne Vega and Prince and you'll find the note. It's really cool. Yeah.
Nice.
That's so cool.
Super cool.
I've heard great stories about Prince, like just off the wall stories. You wouldn't like, did you know he was a huge ping pong player? And would go to, I guess Susan Sarandon had a ping pong place in New York City, and he'd invite other celebrities there. And I guess he invited, I want to say it was Jimmy Fallon or something. And Jimmy walks downstairs and he's like, "Where's Prince?" He can't find him. And then all of a sudden somebody rips back a curtain and Prince is standing there wearing a big sequins shirt, 2 paddles crossed over, and is like, "Get ready." Hands him one. Just whoops Jimmy Fallon. And as he scores the winning shot, you have it goes around the table. Jimmy goes and grabs the ball. He turns around. Prince is gone. Doesn't even say goodbye. Prince is just gone, just whoops his ass in ping pong. And then I guess he's leaving in a limo, and Questlove comes out and he's like, "Oh no, I missed it." So Questlove comes out and he goes, Did I miss it? And he said the limo window goes down halfway, and Prince looked at him and goes, "Talk to your boy." And then the window slowly went back up and he just pulled away.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm not surprised. Yeah.
Yeah.
Never ceases to amaze me. That doesn't surprise me.
Very talented guy.
What a good
Yeah,
man.
that was my very first concert I ever went to as a kid was Prince.
Really?
Oh
Mine
my
was,
gosh. And it was just Air Supply.
yeah, my mom made me go
Ah,
with her. So
yeah, my
I'm here
concert.
to
I was with my mom for that concert too.
feel
But
bad.
I just the vision, even to this day, out of all concerts, is the one that really stood out the most. It was him and Sheila E. And
Oh,
when
wow.
when he came through, you just knew it was going to happen. I had this. I remember the feeling that I'm almost positive he's going to start with this song, and he did it. And he comes up out of the stage, and he's got his white guitar that has the I don't even know what you call them, like the corkscrew at the end on the top of it. Beautiful white guitar comes up out of the stage, and he starts with "Dearly Beloved, We're Gathered Here Today." And
Yeah.
I knew that he was going to come out with that one of my favorites. And man, was that a concert! Just
Oh, yeah.
phenomenal. He's such a musician. I mean, he played so many instruments, and he's a performer. And now we have leadership lessons. I mean, what a guy! Incredible guy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Born to be a rock star.
Born to be a rock star. Absolutely.
So cool.
Good stuff. Yeah. And there was another one, Chris. There's a quote in the book I really liked. And it was from Welcome to, was it, or Coming to America, not Welcome to America.
Yeah.
Let me find it here real quick. Luke and I were just talking about it.
Movie.
Yeah. And it was about leaders, and you probably remember. Oh, here we go. So it's a line from Eddie Murphy. He played Prince Akeem, right?
Yeah.
I got that right.
Yeah.
Unearned, or what he taught us. Unearned leadership creates pleasers. Earned leadership creates believers.
Yeah.
That really resonated with me personally, as I talk a lot about leadership and values-based leadership and so forth. And I thought, how perfect is that? You know?
I appreciate it. Yeah. You listen, Prince Akeem, of all of the 80s movies that I've explored for lessons, and there's been a lot of them, and I'm working on a third book right now with some more movies.
Mm-hmm.
Coming to America and Prince Akeem, there are so many great lessons in that movie. And when I watched it the first time around, I was 18 years old. I mean, it did what it needed to do for me. It entertained me and made me laugh and made me come back and watch it again. As I got older, I started watching it from a different perspective. And I saw this guy, Prince Akeem, he taught us so much. And that lesson comes from when, at least from my perspective, comes from when he said, when you think of garbage, think of Akeem. Now, that was kind of a throwaway line in the movie. I mean, it's not one of the lines that's the most memorable. Of course, the barbershop is a great memorable scene, and there's some other great lines. But when you think of garbage, think of Akeem. And the reason it resonated with me and stuck with me and I got this lesson out of it was because he was born into royalty. He was a prince, born into it, given to him by birth. And there's a scene at the beginning of the movie where he's asking a girl, like, what do you like? Or whatever you like. Well, what kind of food do you like? Whatever food you like. What kind of music do you like? Whatever music you like. And it started me thinking that, well, he got this position because of birth, he was born into royalty, and everybody just wanted to please him because of this position. So whether they're scared or there's not a respect there as much as there is either a fear or it's, I can maybe get something out of this because this person was just given this position. And many people who they're given leadership positions who didn't earn them don't know how to do it. They don't know how to lead. They're just given this position. It's pretty clear. When he went to Queens, New York, and he took the job at McDowell's, the fast food restaurant, and it was an entry-level position, he didn't tell anybody he was a prince. And he said, when you think of garbage, think of Akeem. What it told me was this idea of earned leadership. Yeah. And so he doesn't tell anybody, and then he earns everybody's respect through hard work. And also taking out Samuel L. Jackson when he tries to rob the restaurant. That was Samuel L. Jackson, by the way, who tried to rob the restaurant. You don't know, it's a good piece of trivia. Cuba Gooding Jr. was also in Coming to America in a small part as well. He was the kid in the barbershop getting the haircut at the very beginning.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, he this idea of unearned leadership creates pleasers, earned leadership creates believers. He earns his leadership and then he creates believers. And that's a really important lesson for the workplace because too often we see things like nepotism or people who get into a position for different reasons. And then once they're there, people don't really know how to react to them because they don't have a track record of leadership or at least a track record of growth. The second thing it does when you do that, when you give people leadership positions without them earning it, what it signals to the rest of your team and the rest of the company is that, hey, there's not a path for me to work hard and work my way up. You always want people, when you hire them, to believe that there's an opportunity to move and to see that there's an opportunity to move their way up the channel or move their way up the leadership, up to a leadership position. And if you're just giving people leadership positions without them earning it, you're going to lose your best assets. You're going to lose your best employees to companies where they have an opportunity. They see that and they're going to start to look around. They're not going to tell you, but they're going to move on. And before you know it, you're going to be left with a bunch of pleasers. And that's no way to build a business or an organization.
No.
That is for sure.
I love that.
There's just not a lot of oh boy, this could go down many roads. When you talk about leadership inside of companies, especially when you think about the vast majority or the majority of people, I believe today, according to latest census reports, work for small to mid-sized business. So odds are there's whether it's the original founder or it's family or somebody that started the company, and it's positional leadership because they're in the position, positional authority, if you will, certainly does not equate to earned leadership.
No,
not whatsoever. Right.
Yeah. I mean, there are exceptions. I think if you're a family-run business and your kid starts out right out of college or right out of high school working for the company and takes all these different positions, then you start to see that earning, the earned leadership, because people can look at that and say, well, he started or she started at the bottom and had to work their way up just like anybody else. Yeah. There are exceptions, but for the most part, I mean, this is a real thing. This unearned leadership is a huge problem, I think, in large corporations as well, by the way.
Yeah, for sure.
This lines up with, and Bo, I think you were the one that mentioned this to me before I went down a rabbit hole, but the Peter principle. Were you the one that mentioned that to me?
The Peter principle. It doesn't sound familiar.
Wow. Okay. Well,
on another episode.
I don't think it was on an episode, actually. I think it was just in one of just a Bo and Luke conversation.
All right, let's hear it.
I'm going to botch this anyways. So, but what I believe, without pulling it up on Google right now, the Peter principle basically is a principle that says people get promoted for the job that they're in and then get promoted into a position that they have no business having. So what we're doing in big organizations today is everybody is working their way up to a position they have no business being in. They're basically working their way up to incompetence in every position. So you take your best salesperson, right? You promote them to being a manager.
Yeah.
Well, selling stuff has nothing to do with leading people, right? So now you're incompetent at that job.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Peter principle is saying that, especially in large organizations, we have a culture of promoting ourselves into incompetence, which is
Yeah. It's also, when you talk about that, the idea of people being promoted into leadership positions where maybe they're not prepared for that, or that's just not their skill set. There's a movie that in the second book that I talk about, Bo, that you, when you read it, The Lost Boys.
Yeah.
And The Lost Boys, for people who didn't grow up in the 80s, it may be one you missed. I would highly, highly recommend it. It is a phenomenal movie. Kiefer Sutherland plays arguably the best vampire of all time, in my opinion. And if you like Kiefer Sutherland, you'll really love the movie. So in this movie, the kids who, basically what happens is, in this fictional town in California, there is a vampire infestation. And there are all these people missing. People, the police think that people are being murdered, but in actuality, there's this vampire infestation. They're eating the people or turning them into vampires. And there's two kids that work in their parents' comic book store on the boardwalk. One of them happens to be Corey Feldman. And the two kids can't weigh more than 180 pounds combined, soaking wet. They're not going to kick anybody's ass. They're not Chuck Norris or Bruce Lee or Arnold Schwarzenegger or even Bruce Willis, in action hero. No, they're not an action hero. They don't scream like, hey, we're going to solve this problem in our town, but they do. And with those two, and Corey Haim, who also is not a large individual or anybody that would look like somebody that could tear up some vampires, they actually solve the problem in their town. They kill the vampires. They get rid of the vampire infestation. And the point here is that problem solvers don't come in a one-size-fits-all package.
Mm-hmm.
So on the surface, on the outside, you would look at them and say, what kind of problem could they solve? They're not going to solve any problem for us. But they actually did. And this goes back to, Luke, what you were talking about with titles. We oftentimes in the workplace, we look at somebody's title and we say they're a problem solver. Not necessarily. And most of the time, they aren't the problem solver. even if they're good at what they do, they've got all these outside factors, unfortunately, in a larger corporation that are in their ear kind of dictating what they can and can't do. And somebody who doesn't have the title a lot of times will be your problem solver because they don't have any skin in the game. There's nobody barking at them on one side or the other, telling them how to do this or do that. Or if you open this door, this might happen. And number two, you have to give people opportunities. You have to expand that circle of trust. That's not an 80s movie, but Meet the Parents, right? You have to expand that circle of trust.
Yeah.
Let people in, even if they don't have the right title, because you are overlooking your problem solvers if you don't. And a lot of these companies say, I've had the same problem for a year. Why can't we come up with a solution? Well, how about stop bringing in the same 5 people into the room and look outside of that? Yeah. There's a great story, actually. There's a documentary called High Score that's on Netflix right now. And I want to say it was the, oh God, I can't remember the name of the company now that did Sonic the Hedgehog. So Sonic the Hedgehog, Mario Brothers was the huge thing, right? And oh man, I can't believe I can't think of the movie, the name of the company. Huge company, huge toy company. Anyway, they, I believe it was the CEO of another large toy company like Mattel or something. He had retired. He was on the beach in Hawaii, and this Japanese guy comes up in a suit, full business suit in Hawaii on the beach, and says, "Hey, I'm from." Oh man, I cannot believe Sonic the Hedgehog. Anyway. From that particular company. And he says, I want to have you come in for an interview for our CEO position.
Yeah.
He flies to Japan and he lays out his plan for how they can compete and ultimately beat Mario Brothers because they couldn't figure out a way to do it.
It was Sega.
Thank you. Yep. Sega, right? So Nintendo and Sega. So Sega, they weren't competing at all. And he laid out this plan in front of the board of directors. And they hated it. They all hated it and thought it was horrible. He had this 5-step plan, thought it was horrible. He walks out and he says, well, I guess there's no way they're going to hire me. The CEO who came to Hawaii and brought him in for the interview said, you're hired. And he hired him because these guys weren't solving the problem.
Yeah.
So if they hated what he was doing, he thought maybe he's right. Maybe he's onto something because these guys hate it. Maybe he's onto something.
Wow.
Really cool.
Yeah, that's a cool lesson for sure.
That is awesome. I've heard that stuff. So Mark Andreessen, one of the founders of NetSuite, like multi-billionaire, he wrote this book.
Yeah, Netscape.
Yeah, NetSuite. NetSuite.
Yeah.
They sold, it's like this ERP. They sold to Oracle or something. Is it Netscape? Whatever. Net something. Sorry, Mark Andreessen, if you're listening to this. Light us up on social media. Yeah, anyways.
Please.
Yeah. So, but I'll redeem myself. So he gave some good advice that said when catastrophe hit his companies, like most people would say, oh, well, let's keep this quiet. We don't want the employees to go out looking for other jobs, etc. Right. He had the opposite reaction. He said, well, no, they're not going to go out and look for other jobs. They're going to band together and try to solve this. And he said, what gave us a competitive advantage was we got more brains on the problem than we ever would. So he's like, to your point, if I only have 5 brains trying to solve this problem, imagine what I could do with 100 human brains on this. And I always thought about that. Like, instead of keeping something quiet, put it out to everybody else on your team. If they leave, then you know what? Maybe they weren't going to solve it anyways, but a lot of people rise to the occasion and do it.
Yeah, totally.
That's awesome.
It was all right. I have like a few brain cells left and they just went bzz, bzz, and fired together. And I got that from, although I botched the company name, but whatever.
Well, speaking of a few brain cells, Bo, I don't know if you were able to read the Fast Times chapter.
Yeah.
About brain cells, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some good lessons. There's some good lessons in that one for sure. I will say before, so that I get this out there before we go off the episode, you're an author, I'm an author, and reading through your book, I was really thinking now there's great references to like the characters, and it's almost like giving the character the credit for coming up with what they said. But we know that there was a screenplay written. Somebody wrote all of those lines and those words, right?
Yeah, totally.
In all of your research, Chris, did you ever come across like common writers or writers like who maybe wrote some of the stuff that you're really pulling out that they were either good leaders themselves or they were known for their writing abilities and writing about these topics and putting that type of stuff into these characters?
That's a great question.
Curious. Yeah.
That is a great question, because a lot of times the writers are, unless they're also the director, they tend to be, behind the scene and not really in a position where they're going to be leading a lot of people or cobbling a lot of things together. They may have a team of writers, but a lot of times it's written and then it's rewritten, and that's really what their role is. So I guess if I was to look at, obviously you have John Hughes, who wrote and directed a lot of the stuff that he did. Not just what we know, like The Breakfast Club and 16 Candles and Weird Science and Pretty in Pink, but Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. A lot of people don't know that was his. Home Alone was also John Hughes. So he I think as a writer and then as a director, because a director has to be a leader.
Yeah.
You talk about personalities that you have to put in.
Yeah, no kidding.
Make them all work together.
Yeah, no, for sure.
The other one would be, now he did some stuff in the 80s, but also in the 90s was Cameron Crowe. And Cameron Crowe wrote Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Say Anything, which is a great 80s movie. Lloyd Dobler is one of the greatest movie characters of all time, in my opinion, not just the 80s. He also, for those of you in the 90s, he also did Almost Famous, or early 2000s. He also did Almost Famous and Jerry Maguire. So Cameron Crowe was a really good one. And he worked closely with Amy Heckerling. Now, Amy Heckerling, I've heard great things about as well. And I know that she directed Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And then she also directed Clueless, which is kind of like the 90s version of Fast Times. Both phenomenal. But that's a great question. I don't have a solid answer on the writers. I think if you're a writer / director, then that would be probably the best one.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's good. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like in the 80s, they were still trying to teach us like decent lessons through the movies, if that makes sense. Before, like, now we trudge forward and we just I don't know. There's a lot of bad stuff out there. Like, I feel like they were trying to make us good human beings, at least through the movies in the 80s.
Yeah, I'm biased. I think the storytelling was a little bit better. I think it had to be, the characters had to be better. Like we talked about before, if the three of us decided to do a movie tomorrow and somebody said, we're just going to give you this massive budget, go make this movie. And halfway through, we're like, our movie's terrible. Our actors are terrible. This is terrible. Let's just take the rest of our budget and we'll throw it at CGI and we'll create these incredible special effects in this awesome world. And then people will have to see it in the movie theater and we'll be able to make some money back internationally and all will be right with the world. Did not have that option in the 80s.
Yeah.
Either you had a great story and great characters that people cared about or you didn't.
Yeah.
I think that was the big difference. I think that's the big difference.
Yeah, no, that's true. I would throw on top of that, there's so many platforms today that did not exist in the 80s and is for options. And whether it's movie companies, streaming platforms, they're all competing for 24/7 content. They just have to have it. And I think that leads also to our problem today and not a lot of great, like really good writing, really good movies and so forth.
Yeah, I think, what's funny about today compared to the 80s, what is better, in my opinion, sitcoms aside, because I think there was just these incredible sitcoms in the 80s. Sitcoms aside, television is better. The content. We think about the shows that we all get addicted to right now with Breaking Bad and Stranger Things and Cobra Kai. We mentioned Cobra Kai earlier.
Yeah.
There is some amazing television now.
Yeah.
I actually think it's superseded the movie. I think it's past the movies in terms of what the great content is in pop culture today. I think television is where it's at, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
And while now there's more, I feel like it was in a funk for a little bit because there was this area before Netflix and everything, before streaming, where things on network TV were completely censored, right?
Yeah.
But the population didn't want that, right? And it put TV in a real funky spot to where they either had to produce a movie, there were no limited series. Now they can go in, no commercials. They can, basically the stuff that you're describing, this TV that like the streaming we see on Netflix, they're pretty much like 13-hour long movies.
Yeah.
Just 13 episodes in 1 hour,
And they're really well done.
Obviously
I don't think anything's better than Magnum PI, but
sure.
I'm biased. So
I just read recently that Tom Selleck was the first selectee for Indiana Jones.
Yes.
But he I guess he wanted it, but he ended up not being able to take it because of his contract requirements for Magnum PI.
Yeah. Yeah. That's,
And that's something. So then Harrison Ford gets basically a huge break, right?
Yeah. That's great. And I mean, but they both have done very well, but clearly not being Indiana Jones is probably still weighing on him.
Yeah, probably so. Good stuff. Awesome, man. So what's your take on the new Cobra Kai?
I love it. I think there's several reasons that I love it. One is, I think we were talking before the show, I love that William Zabka who plays Johnny, who I think is a really good actor, is getting a second bite at the apple. I think that's awesome. I'm really happy to see him having, this career that's probably going to be, that's going to lead him into a lot more after Cobra Kai. He's very talented. I love it because what it did for 80s pop culture. First of all, it was another show that brought 80s pop culture to generations that weren't around during the 80s, kids that are even 15, 16, 17 years old. And I talked about earlier with the guy on the Camaro and the jeans jacket with the Led Zeppelin patch. That was my way of finding out about 70s pop culture and wasn't going to happen. These kids now, they watch a show like Cobra Kai, or let's just take Stranger Things, for example. They hear a song Pretty in Pink by the Psychedelic Furs. They're like, oh, that's a cool song. They go Google Psychedelic Furs. They're like, Pretty in Pink. They listen to Pretty in Pink. They're like, Pretty in Pink's a movie? Wow, what movie is that? I'm going to go watch it. It was made by who? This guy, John Hughes. What did John Hughes do? Oh, he did this movie and this movie. And all of a sudden, they know as much about 80s pop culture as somebody that lived it. So with Cobra Kai, I think that's a really great thing that it's doing. The other thing it did is it's now created this entirely new industry of, instead of remakes, which I hate. Yeah. I'm a huge Patrick Swayze fan. I get upset whenever they remake his movies. When they remade Red Dawn, I was just sick to my stomach that we remade Red Dawn. Wolverines, leave it where it is. But the point I wanted to make was that now with Cobra Kai, they're actually doing sequels to those movies instead of remaking them. Coming to America is in production to do the sequel. It's supposed to happen, but because of COVID, it got pushed back. Top Gun is another one that's coming out. It's going to be a sequel. And now they're talking about doing some other movies as television shows like Cobra Kai. So I think in that respect, I love that it's created this new genre, which is, instead of remaking these movies and trying to make Axel Foley is Eddie Murphy. I love Kevin Hart, but if they redid Beverly Hills Cop and made Kevin Hart Axel Foley, I would say, no way, it's not going to work. Axel Foley's Eddie Murphy. Stop taking these characters and making them someone else. Right. Build on the story that you already have. Love that.
Agreed.
Agree completely.
I want to see Howard the Duck or Short Circuit. I was young in the 80s. I was wearing out those VHS tapes. If you ever caught those, Bo. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't.
Yeah, Chris knows.
Alive.
Yes. Yeah, it's both great, wonderful films, Bo. If you could watch them tonight on Netflix, if they're out. Yeah, it's just go turn it on with Marcy and say, hey, we're gonna watch Howard the Duck.
I was actually really disappointed in myself when I was reading Chris's book over the weekend, because I was a teenager. Those were my teen years in the 80s. And I loved the movies, still love the movies. But I just, in reading Chris's book, I was like, I can't believe how much I don't remember, how much I do not recall. Sure, I know the name or the titles of the general themes of the movies that were in Chris's book, but like the plot, the characters, the different things that they were talking about and so forth, man, it had pretty much all left. Exit stage left.
You were probably the guy wearing the jean jackets and sitting on the Camaro, man.
Yeah, you're just waiting for someone like Chris to come up and ask me about Led Zeppelin, right?
That's right. Darn right.
Billy Madison.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, no, that was not me.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I just I appreciate that you got through the whole book, and I think for me it's really fun to write it. It allows me to wax nostalgic about my youth, which I think most of us enjoy doing. Stand By Me, Stephen King. That's a great movie, right? And it's a Stephen King. Actually, Stephen King's greatest stories are not horror. They're actually Stand By Me, The Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption. So Stand By Me, at the end, the main character, Gordy, who's now grown up, says, I never had any friends like I did when I was 12. Jesus, does anyone? And I think for those of us that had a good childhood, that's so true. I mean, those kids, my friends when I was 12, those were the guys I went on adventures with.
Yeah.
They're the ones I explored with. I went into the woods to, and just like looked for old beer cans. And that was like an awesome day. Or we bought tickets to ET and we snuck into Fast Times. Those were the guys who did that stuff too.
I love that because I have this vision in my head that if you could, even today, if you could bring those friends back to your life for a day, right? All of those same ones that you had those adventures with. I think that's what you'd want to go do. You'd want to go have an adventure. Yeah. It wouldn't be like, we don't need to catch up on what you've been doing for the past, 35 years. I don't care about all that. Let's go sneak into the movies like we used to do, or let's go do X, Y, and Z,
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. I love that. That's great.
It's a great line. And it's a great life lesson about, everyone should wax nostalgic at some point. It's good for your soul. It's good for your heart. At the end of the Breakfast Club, Allison and Bender are having a conversation, and Allison says, when you grow old, your heart dies. And Bender says, who cares? And so who cares? And she says, I care. And I think one of the ways that we can keep our heart from dying as we grow older is to continue to wax nostalgic, continue to, be youthful, not just in the things that we do in our daily life, but go back to this pop culture, these movies, this music every so often, and just listen to it, because it does feel like it's just coming through you, and it will remind you of something, a really great memory, hopefully remind you of a great memory or something awesome that you did when you were a kid. And it'll just make you smile or laugh, or maybe even pick up the phone and call that friend from when you were 12. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. That's great advice. Super good.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
Yeah. Well, Chris, any parting thoughts, comments? How do people find your book? How do they find you? If somebody wanted to engage you for a keynote speech or
absolutely appreciate
get 1,000 copies of your book for their workplace, how do they do that?
1,000 copies would be awesome. I'll give you a really good discount. I want to mention one more thing, that this idea of 80s pop culture teaching us lessons about the workplace and life, what it really teaches us is that some of the greatest lessons can come from the most unusual of places. Don't always go to the same well to look for your lessons for your workplace and life. Try to find places that are unique, because they will teach you if you just dig a little bit. If Jess Piccoli can teach us valuable lessons about the workplace, and he can, then you can get valuable lessons about the workplace and life from anywhere. So just dig a little bit sometimes. Don't go to the same people or the same well or the same, organizations or books or whatever. Try something different. And I would say for me, if I do a lot of speaking as well, virtual, obviously right now, you can find me chrisclews.com, CHRISCLEWS.com, chrisclews.com. All my information is there. You'll see this podcast up when we have it. I'll put that up on the website as well. For social media, in my Instagram is at chrisclews 80s, 80s. Twitter, believe it or not, I got at 80s pop culture. I don't know how that was available, but 80s pop culture. That's me, Chris Clews, 80s pop culture. And then on LinkedIn, I'm Chris Clews, and Facebook, Chris Clews. So
nice.
Those would be the best places to find me.
Well, thanks for that. So listeners, pay attention, follow Chris, check out his book, check out his website, and so forth, and you will not be disappointed.
And books on Amazon. My books are on Amazon. For that, if you want that 1,000 quantity order, you can reach out to me through social media or my email.
Yeah, good stuff. You can contact me too. I'll get them and I'll make a deal for you.
Broker Bo over here.
That works. That works for me. Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, thanks, Chris. We really appreciate having you on the show. It's been fun. Trip down memory lane for sure.
Well, thanks, Bo and Luke. I really appreciate the megaphone. It means a lot to me when guys like you are willing to bring me on and have a conversation, because I know the work that goes into building a podcast. So I really, really appreciate the megaphone.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Yep. Stay rad, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the hot. Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. Yeah, we're stealing that. All right. That's a wrap. Tune in for a new episode every Thursday. You can subscribe to our email newsletter for information on upcoming guests, giveaways, and more. Rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you to our sponsor, Sound United, for quality broadcast audio throughout Season 2.